Tom Slater's here from Spiked Online. We've got a little clip for you, Tom. Once again, Just Stop Oil are back. I mean, I guess you can always tell when they're back because the holidays are over and they've managed to recoup themselves into their whatever their normal sort of jobs are. They're not flying around the world, you know, enjoying themselves in the Seychelles and places like that. This is last night in the West End, The Tempest, which is a new play starring Sigourney Weaver. You know, so it's quite sort of, you can just see them there bringing on their orange banner. I'm not quite sure what the orange banner says, but they also apparently had a confetti gun with them. I mean, the irony of this to me is that most of the people who go to the theatre in London are probably quite well aware of climate change. Some of them might even be believers in it, and there might even be people who drive electric cars because they've probably got a bit of money, and there might even be people who actually recycle everything. So I mean, they're kind of preaching to the converted here, aren't they?
I think this is one of the things that really turned the mood against them, is that originally they would focus their efforts almost entirely on the working class, like it would be people trying to get to work, people trying to drive to their next job.
After they got dragged off the top of that underground train in the East End of London by people who are actually going to work, they sort of thought maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
Absolutely, you know, they stopped going for the snooker and they started going for the opera or showing up at the British Library. And I think they're sort of throwing soup at Van Gogh. And at that point, people started to think, okay, we've had enough of this now. These are, as you say, probably Guardian readers.
They're just idiots.
You know, audiences who are still thinking this has gotten a bit too much now. Like these, if you cannot even abide a West End theatre production because you are so gripped by your apocalyptic terror.
Right.
There's obviously something wrong with you. And
there is.
This isn't about politics, this is about your own mania.
Yeah, absolutely right. And protester Hayley Walsh is quoted in a piece in the Mail today, which is 42 years of age, a lecturer, believe it or not, and mum of 3 from Nottingham. She said, "I'm scared for my children. I can't sleepwalk them into a future of food shortages, life-threatening storms and wars for resources." Well, that's something completely different, isn't it? I mean, wars, you know, sorry, that's got nothing to do with climate change. I mean, people have wars, but why is that part of Just Stop Oil?
It's a whole theory they have, is that everything's going to go to hell in a handcart because of climate change, that it's going to lead to society to break down, there's going to be wars everywhere. You hear the stuff that they're fed and you can kind of understand why they're so extreme, why they think nothing should get in the way of their protests. But no one else really believes this. These people aren't concerned about climate change or whatever. They're hysterical about it, they're apocalyptic about it, and everyone has switched off from them now. They've 100% been
they've made themselves a laughing stock. Yeah, they've made
know.
themselves a laughing stock. Apparently the banner said over 1.5 degrees is a global shipwreck. Is that supposed to be some reference to the Tempest?
I suppose it is.
And Shakespeare.
And I can't imagine the audience are thinking, "Oh, that's clever."
Yeah,
you've ruined my evening, but that's clever. Well done.
Most of the audience are basically saying, you know, this is a complete and utter travesty. Idiots, get off. You know, they were booed. I mean, as you say, I mean, if they did it in a place which was perhaps a bit more working class, they'd probably be given a good shoeing.
Yeah.
The other story in the paper today, which is quite amusing, page 17 of the Times, a 78-year-old climate protester has had her prison term extended by 20 days for being unlawfully at large. I mean, it doesn't sound like she's that much of a threat, to be honest, because government contractors could not find a tracking bracelet that fitted her wrist. I assume because it was too big as opposed to being too small.
No, absolutely.
She doesn't look like a particularly large woman.
And it's one of those things where there's something about the idea of a 78-year-old protester being unlawfully at large, which sounds quite amusing. It is a reminder, though, a lot of these protesters are of an advanced age, shall we say.
You will not believe this, she's a retired teacher from Bristol.
This is,
I mean, how shocking is that?
For a Just Stop Oil
incredible
sort of protester. This isn't just sort of, you know, art students who've taken a day off from bugging off at Goldsmiths to go and cause some trouble. There's a lot of quite older people who are particularly gripped by this. I mean, I know they've got more time on their hands, and maybe that's got something to do with it. But time and again, you've got you know, pretty solid retirees who are getting involved in this stuff now. So maybe that's an extremism threat we need to worry about, is the green pensions.
Well, I wonder if the Home Office has got them under surveillance, because, I mean, this particular woman actually did disrupt the M25 in November 2022, so quite a long time ago. Carla Denyer, who of course is Green MP for Bristol, has criticised the Ministry of Justice's decision to extend her prison term, and her brother says, "How has it proved so impossible to fit this normal-sized woman who desperately wants to have an electronic monitoring with any of the many different forms of monitoring available to the authorities? This was true of the time she was waiting at home and has continued to be true in the months since she has been back in prison." Well, I'm sorry, Ms Delap, but maybe you shouldn't have committed a crime in the first place, and then you wouldn't have been anywhere near a bleeding prison, would you?
I mean, that is what it comes down to. These people think they were going to be applauded for breaking the law, and the soft touch they got originally from the criminal justice system was insane. You had judges who were congratulating them on their good efforts, even as they, send them down for their pretty piffling sentence.
Yes.
That's changed now because obviously the rules toughened up. And it's worth reminding people say this is about protest, this is a crackdown on protest. If that was the case, I'd be concerned about it as well. There's no absolute right to block the M25, and yet people seem to have convinced themselves that there is if they happen to agree with the people doing it.
More news on the ridiculously stupid people who like to demonstrate about almost anything. Police arrested 12 people in an operation where officers had to abseil down Oxford's Radcliffe camera after it was occupied by students protesting about the war in Gaza. Now, you'll like this one, because this was organised by members of the Oxford Action for Palestine group, which must be really, really influential in the Middle East, I'm sure. Apparently they seized the camera, part of the Bodleian Library, on Friday, and they claimed that they were going to rename the building the Khalida Jarrah Library. And what's the point of these people? I mean, why don't they just get on with their lives?
Because it's about them.
Or go to bleeding Gaza and help some people and do something properly.
The idea that the people of Gaza will happen upon this and be filled with a sense of pride. This is about them feeling good about themselves, feeling radical.
Look at me, I'm waving a Palestine flag.
Feeling interested.
Yeah.
It's trying to exploit someone else's tragedy to boost your own ego. It's embarrassing. It'll make no difference. They know it will make no difference.
Right.
But that's not the point of it.
No, exactly. Absolutely unbelievable. Let's have a look at what David Miliband's up to, because Ed Miliband, I should say. David Miliband's trying to get Peter Mandelson's job in America, isn't he? Ed Miliband apparently is talking about collaborating with China.
In the absence of the US, if China takes on a more prominent role, what scope is there for constructive UK collaboration with China to achieve good climate outcomes for the UK?
I suppose the truth about this on China is there is no solution to the climate crisis without China, because they represent such a huge level of global emissions now. And, this is a point my US friends, Democrats and Republicans make. And so, of course, part of what we have to do as a UK government is work with China, among many other countries, to drive forward climate ambition.
He spends a lot of time in these committees, doesn't he? I'm not sure what else he does. I mean, there's also a story this morning in The Sun saying basically he will fall short of his wildly ambitious clean power targets, according to research that's been done by a climate consultancy company. Basically, a shortfall of 32 gigawatts, which is equivalent to turning on 16 million kettles at once. I don't know how you work these things out. But, I mean, clearly he is not going to achieve whatever it is. And I keep reading stories in the Sunday papers about how basically the Labour government wants to ditch him because he's become a liability.
Well, I mean, he was always going to be, wasn't it? I mean, Keir Starmer kind of came into politics, came into government really with these two conflicting sort of people who had completely different agendas. You've got Ed Miliband who wants to immiserate us, and you've got Rachel Reeves who at least claims to want to create economic growth.
Right.
You can't have net zero and economic growth.
Right.
That penny is slowly starting to drop with this government, and every time the kind of green agenda has been put up against what Rachel Reeves has wanted to achieve, it's always lost.
Yes.
So you do wonder how long this can go on, and maybe keeping him in committee rooms in Westminster rather than out and about actually in the public eyes is a useful thing for the government insofar as it doesn't continue to show up the fact that, even though it's too little too late, but the government is turning away from it.
It's almost as though he's sitting there as a sort of adjunct to the government, that he's not actually part of it, that he's kind of off to the side like some kind of jester. Yeah. That they kind of don't have to really... You never see him with anybody else from the government. He's just always on his own, sitting behind a desk telling people things that he thinks they want to hear.
Meanwhile, the government keeps disagreeing with him. They want to expand Heathrow now, they want to do this, that and the third. It's
pushing back all the targets, forget about the net zero by 2030 or 2040 or 2050. I mean, just ridiculous.
One to watch. Definitely.
Yeah, quite one to watch. Tom, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online, of course.